Now at this point, the Tata Nexon EV needs no real introduction. I mean, it's the car that is almost single-handedly responsible for making Tata Motors the #1 electric car maker in India. And this right here is the Nexon EV Max, which has a slightly larger battery and a bit more range, only sweetening the deal. And it's not hard to see why. I mean, it was the right car at the right time at the right price. And it was so good that it even managed to see off rivals from a segment above thanks to its knockout package and appeal. So it's had its own segment to itself for pretty much all this time, but that was going to change, wasn't it? And it has, with this, the brand new Mahindra XUV400. That's right, another homegrown e-SUV right in the Nexon EV's backyard, and this is a grudge match we have been dying to officiate. So who do you think it will be? Mahindra or Tata Motors? Take your pick and we will tell you at the end. That's right, let us know in the comments below if you're batting for Team XUV or Team Nexon. And while you're down there, if you enjoyed this video, we'd love it if you gave it a thumbs up. And if you like this sort of thing, why not subscribe to Autocar India and hit the bell icon to stay notified. I said earlier that the Nexon EV was the right car at the right time at the right price, and so it's not much of a surprise that the XUV400 follows that winning formula so closely. They're both based on existing internal combustion compact SUVs, they both have similar battery capacities and power outputs, and they both have exactly the same price. But then the differences start to show. For one, while the Nexon EV is still a sub-4 meter SUV, the XUV400 is 200 mm longer than the XUV300, making it technically a mid-size SUV. It's also a bit wider and taller than the Nexon EV and has a 102 mm longer wheelbase. And while the Tata has more of a coupe-like shape, the Mahindra is a bit boxier and more upright. But which design do you like better? Let us know down in the comments section below. Now, with greater size comes greater practicality, and Mahindra has used the opportunity to address an old complaint. Now you might remember that one of the biggest shortcomings of the Mahindra XUV300 was its tiny boot. And that has been remedied, and how? By the XUV400, because it's no longer a sub-4 meter SUV and all that extra length has gone into the boot space. So this new boot stands at 378 liters, and it really shows you can get a lot of stuff in the back of here. Now the Nexon EV, obviously the same as it ever was, 350 liters, which you'd agree isn't too far behind. And this one has a slight advantage over the Mahindra in that it has a slightly lower loading lip, which makes getting stuff in and out a whole lot easier. But let's face it, with compact EVs like this, you're more likely to use the boot for airport runs than outstation trips. The urban jungle is what they're made for, and for that, let's have a look at what they're like if you're sat in the back seat. Now the back seat of the XUV400 is certainly not lacking in space. I mean, just look at it. I've got loads of knee room, loads of headroom. I'm just under 5'8", and the front seats are set to my position as they will be in the Nexon EV. The only thing I can say is that maybe the seat squab is a little bit short, but you're sat nice and high up, so that doesn't feel like too much of a problem. But yes, there is a slight lack of thigh support. It's not a particularly well contoured bench, and it is a bit flat feeling, but really it's comfy enough, and it's got a nice recline angle. It's got big windows too that let in a lot of light, but the one thing I am missing back here is a set of AC vents. Other things missing here are charging ports of any sort, as well as proper storage pockets behind the seats. These bands aren't going to hold much. But what about the Tata? Now the back seat of the Nexon EV is visibly more compact than that of the XUV400. You also notice that you have to make a slightly higher step up into the cabin, and then once you're sat down, you'll notice the seat is a little bit closer to the floor, more than likely due to the battery pack underneath. Each of these seats though is rather comfortable. It's pretty snug, it's pretty comfy, it's well contoured for two at least. And you do get a sense of airiness from this light colored fabric. The windows aren't massive, but headroom is rather good, and knee room is very good, just not as good as what you get in the XUV400. And of course there's the bonus of rear AC vents in this car. And while the XUV's strappy seat bag storage solution is unusual, the Nexon EV doesn't get rear seat pockets at all. Now I'll tell you about the front half of the interiors from the driver's seat because we've got a pretty substantial drive ahead of us. So I'm going to hop into the Nexon now and get this show on the road. So when starting any drive in an EV, it's always nice to have a full 100% charge on the display there, and that's what I've got right now. It's showing me 250 kilometers of available range, which I think is about right, given that I've been driving this car for a couple of days now. But of course, the indicated range on any EV is reflective of how you have been driving the car before. Over the last 2 days, we've been range testing both these cars, and let's just say we drive them like we would any other car in the city and on the highway. In the city, we cruise with the traffic, we stop when it stops, we go when it goes, and out on the highway, we drive like we would on the highway at highway speeds. Now, of course, driving at highway speeds isn't good for an EV's range, but hey, that's what we're here to do, show you real world usage and real world range. And here is how we did the range test. We drove the cars back to back for over 200 kilometers in and outside Mumbai, swapping drivers every 20 kilometers for consistency. We had the AC set to medium, used eco driving modes for the city and normal driving mode on the highway. In the Nexon, we used maximum regen in the city and minimum regen on the highway, and in the XUV, regen is based on drive modes. And here were the results. As you can see, the two consume power at almost the exact same rate, and as we crossed the 200 kilometer mark, they both had around 15% battery remaining. Both cars also went into limp mode around this time, limiting the speed, and in the case of the Nexon, deactivating the AC too. The end result? Pretty close. Our twin range test showed an overall range of 238.75 kilometers for the XUV400 and 236 kilometers for the Nexon EV Max, both of which are of course much lower than the MIDC rated manufacturer claim. When it comes to charging, both cars are equipped with the higher 7.2 kilowatt AC fast charging capacity their manufacturers offer, and using an AC fast charger, the Nexon took 5 hours and 55 minutes to get from 10 to 100%, while the XUV400 took a slightly quicker 5 hours and 38 minutes. It should be noted that both cars have battery capacities of about 40 kilowatt hours and can be charged much quicker on a DC public fast charger. And after that brief detour, it's back into the Nexon EV Max to tell you about its interior. It's been around for a little while, so we are quite familiar with it, but just for a quick refresher, there are some changes compared to the standard Nexon, and they did a little bit of an update when they brought this Max version out a little while ago. And now, since the original Nexon, this interior has come a long way. And the view out is pretty good, despite the sloping, raked forward A-pillars. I will say though that the finesse and the quality with which this cabin is put together is a little bit short of the XUV400. It's also not really great on storage, with small door pockets, a tiny, relatively useless cubbyhole down there, and a storage bay under there, but that exists only underneath the wireless charger, which is a bit odd. Another bugbear that needs to be mentioned is the rotary drive selector. While it's very cool with its screen display, it simply takes too long to operate, and this can be annoying when doing a 3-point turn or when parking. Now in an EV, you're always going to have one eye on the range meter, and while the Nexon puts that right in front of you, it's not all good news. Much like in the petrol or diesel Nexon, there's a color screen that takes up about 2/3 of the instrument cluster. It's a pretty large screen with lots of room to play with, so it's quite a shame then that everything is so small and relegated to the corners. I really wish they could have taken the opportunity to customize it a bit more for the EV version and really put the important stuff nice and big, easy to read on the move, where you want it. And worse still, if you thought you could get some relief with the touchscreen showing you some information instead, that is not the case. There is no drive info in the touchscreen at all. It is pretty much the exact same touchscreen as in the ICE version. Unfortunately, that in itself is not great news because the Nexon's Harman Source touchscreen is small, slow, crowded, and not intuitive to use. However, there's good news as the new, much nicer 10.25-inch touchscreen introduced in the Harrier and Safari will be coming to the Nexon very soon. But enough about all that, let's see what it's like to drive. Now the Nexon EV Max is not too far behind on the performance front compared to the XUV400. It's got about the same power and yes, a little bit less torque. The XUV has a prodigious 310 Nm versus 250 in this car. Anyway, whatever deficit it has on a spec sheet, it makes up for with instantaneous responses. Even from the first millimeter of accelerator pedal travel, the Nexon EV Max gets moving even in eco mode, but still it's manageable and easy to get used to. In fact, that's quite characteristic of the way the Nexon EV drives on the whole. Any input you make, whether it's to the steering, to the accelerator pedal, to the brakes, the response from the car is instant. The steering has a nice heft to it that's very reassuring, but it also reacts very quickly and very accurately to every tiny little turn you make on it. I will say, however, that it doesn't return quite so freely to center once you've made a big lock. Like when you're taking a U-turn, you have to correct it manually. Keep an eye out for that. But other than that, on the move, it is really, really nice, both when it comes to giving you a feeling of security and also when you want to have a little bit of fun. Even the suspension, it does feel a little bit firmer sprung compared to the XUV400, but that only gives you a greater sense of security, of confidence when it comes to driving this car at speed. It also feels nice in the corners with predictable handling and good composure. This is clearly the better driver's car of the two. Bear in mind, however, this is still an eco-friendly family EV, not a sports car. So if you push it a little too hard, you can overwhelm the limits of grip of these eco-friendly tires that are intended more to maximize range than anything else. The Nexon EV also handily lets you choose from several regen modes, independent of the drive mode, and they feel quite distinct from one another. Now, in none of the three modes does the regen feel excessive or quite an impediment to your driving. And no, you can't do complete one pedal driving where you just come to a complete halt in maximum regen. Similarly, the three drive modes, Eco, City and Sport, do feel quite distinct. Sport especially feels really, really sprightly. But none of them feel like they're hampering your drive in any way. So there's a lot to like in the Nexon EV Max, but is the same true of the Mahindra? Let's go for a drive. I've just stepped into the XUV400 and immediately I'm reminded of the XUV300 because put your foot down and it absolutely flies. I remember when that car came out, it had class-leading torque figures, and so does this one, 310 Newton meters, and really that's quite a lot. This time though, it's instantaneous and this car just rockets forward. How quick does it rocket forward? Well, both cars did a sub 10 second 0 to 100 kph time in our tests, but the XUV400 was half a second quicker, doing a sub 9 second sprint. And the gap is even smaller in roll-on acceleration. But as I'll demonstrate later, putting down the power cleanly in the Mahindra is not that easy. For now, let me tell you about the interior. Now, where the Nexon EV's interior has a lot of beige and lighter colors, especially on the upholstery, this car is a lot darker. It's mostly dark grey and black, but there are a few bronze and blue accents to liven things up just where you need them. I quite like it, but I can see how some might find this just a little too dour. That said, there's a slightly greater sense of space in this cabin, and overall you do feel like you're sat a little bit low and more car-like in this car than in the Nexon. Quality in here is really quite good, and you've got to remember that this is based on essentially quite a very old platform. They've done a good bit to update it, even compared to the XUV300, with things like this more modern looking gear selector and the aforementioned bronze and blue accents. However, some things are not so great. For instance, for an EV, this is quite a basic and rudimentary dial setup. It's very much analog. There is a black and white MID in the center, and yes, you can make the range come front and center, but that is a choice. You have to either choose between a trip meter or range. A lot of the old foibles of the XUV300 have unfortunately returned as well, like these tiny little buttons that are quite hard to hit. And despite the fact that there's this huge area dedicated to the air conditioning, it is only air conditioning, not auto climate control like you get in the Nexon. You can't set a temperature, it is just an AC. And while we're here, let's talk features. These cars push 20 lakhs on road, remember, and for that money, one does have some expectations. Both cars get the likes of sunroofs, leatherette upholstery, connected car tech, drive modes, and auto headlamps and wipers, although neither gets LED headlamps. Both cars get Apple CarPlay, but our test XUV didn't have Android Auto, and from there on, the Nexon EV really steals a march on it. Cooled front seats, wireless phone charging, semi-digital dials, and more are what you'll find only in the Tata. On the safety front, the XUV400 has one key advantage, and that's 6 airbags to the Nexon's 2. But then the Tata offers ESC and traction control, which the Mahindra does not. As for crash tests, neither has been tested yet, but their petrol counterparts both scored 5 stars in the old global NCAP test regime, so expect good results. Now, back to the driver's seat. And with that, let's make a clean segue into what this car is like to drive. And even in the eco or fun mode, as it's called, this car has plenty good responses, but there are some notable distinctions. For instance, in this fun or eco mode, the top speed is restricted to 90 kilometers an hour. Once you reach there, you hit a wall and responsiveness just stops. And if you remember the steering modes in the old XUV300, they are back here, but they are tied to the drive modes. You can't separate them, there's no individual mode, but it's good to see that they've incorporated that nonetheless. It makes a huge difference toggling between the 3 modes, and really performance just woof comes alive once you get it into Fearless. But here's the thing, while the performance in this car feels stronger than in the Nexon EV overall, there is a bit of play put into all the controls. There is some give, there is some travel in the accelerator pedal before you reach the white point, and it just snaps. When that snap happens, you really have to be alert because it is a lot stronger. This will take a lot more getting used to than the Nexon, because you initially get a bit of nothingness and then suddenly it all comes in. It's a similar story with the brake pedal, because as soon as you touch it, not too much happens, but then you get past a certain point and woof, it just puts the anchors on you really, really hard. So again, that's something you'll really have to train yourself to do with the XUV400. Now, for all the power and torque available with this XUV400, I really wish the rest of the car could keep up just as well. For one, if you put your foot down too hard, even while you're already rolling, you will get wheel spin and even torque steer, so that's something to keep in mind. On top of that, the suspension is really, really very soft, and the steering is very light and disconcerting. Now yes, this is more of a problem when you're on the highway or driving at speed, but this, being an EV, will primarily be used in the city, and here, the soft suspension does well to round off small imperfections. The steering, however, always feels loose, and though it gets heavier as you go up the modes, it never feels very confidence-inspiring. Refinement in the XUV400 is pretty good, but I will say not quite as good as what you get in the Tata. This is mainly down to a fair bit more tire and suspension noise that can be heard inside the cabin. These two cars are so evenly matched on paper, and with identical prices of 18.89 lakh rupees ex-showroom and virtually the same real-world range, it's understandable the conundrum that buyers might have in picking one. The XUV400 comes in with a very obvious advantage. Being larger, it's more spacious and has a bigger boot. And once you get behind the wheel, you'll appreciate the stronger performance too. The softer ride makes the XUV400 more city-friendly too, though once you up the pace, it does bounce a fair bit on an uneven road. Spend a bit more time and the slider starts to shift towards the Nexon though. For a start, your money gets you a whole lot more equipment, and these are features that buyers absolutely love, like ventilated seats and wireless charging, which are missing on the XUV400, as is more essential stuff like rear AC vents. But what's alarming is the lack of traction control, which allows the wheels to spin way too much. In fact, the XUV400 feels like a bit of a rushed job, and we suspect that it is. You see, to avoid a cafe penalty, Mahindra would have had to sell a certain number of XUV400s, around 1500 to 2000 units, by the end of March, and as such, the first batch will have gone on sale with these niggles. The Nexon is definitely the more sorted of the two and strikes a happy balance of performance, handling, comfort, and easy drivability. Sure, it has its flaws too, like the low-res touchscreen and some ergonomic issues, although one of those things will be sorted out very soon. Mahindra is likely to give the XUV400 an update soon to iron out its bugs, but for now, it's the Tata that's the better choice.